I'd like to talk for a couple minutes about Josh Vitti. Josh Vitti was one of our Buckeyes, fellow Buckeyes. He took this class. He was actually studying public policy over in the John Glenn Institute, and then went on to get his master's degree in public policy out of the Glenn Institute. I got to meet him in Psych and Law, and he asked me at some point, he was interested in doing some research. He was doing a senior thesis, and he asked if I would function as his thesis advisor. Being only a lecturer, it took a little while for us to get approval for me to do this. So we had a faculty member, Dr. Niagara, and myself, who kind of oversaw Vitti's research for his senior honors thesis. He was looking at the European model about talking about comorbid disorders with sexual offenders. That was his original idea, and we ran into problems because it was going to be impossible in the short time that we had to do his honors thesis to gain access to the people we needed to interview to do this. So he took another approach, and what he did is found a fascinating research article talking about different treatment options. And Josh, being a public policy kind of guy, said, man, this just makes no sense that we look at sexual offense as a single entity and then supply a single treatment. And he wanted to really then look at what are the number of treatments possible, what are the different types of offenders, and is there some way to match up treatment to offender type. And so this is the path that he took in his research. And this is largely based on the subtypes described in Robertiello and Terry, 2007. They used research from the past 30 years to suggest useful treatment options based on offender subtype. So then Josh went on to develop a development of treatment by subtype matrix based on Robertiello and Terry's subtypes and treatments identified during the course of his research. So the purpose and motivation then, and much of this is Josh's writing, I'm taking this from his thesis presentation. The purpose of this paper is to identify more effective treatment protocols for sex offenders and provide guidelines for grouping subtypes together. So in fact, for efficiency's sake, maybe some subtypes of offense are close enough that a single treatment program for multiple subtypes might be possible. His motivation is based on the number of papers that deal with only one particular treatment of type. There's a paucity of papers that bring together multiple subtypes and multiple treatment programs. So it really was kind of an integrative approach to this. The current system of one-size-fits-all treatment program for sex offenders seems ineffectual, and he's holding up recidivism rates and the perception of recidivism rates as good evidence of this. If our treatments are effective, then why do we see so many recidivists, right? Most sex offenders will be released at some point. Effective treatment is imperative. They will not be incarcerated forever necessarily. So the 5 types of treatment families then, types and treatment families, if you look, rapists, right? There's child molesters, there's female offenders, yes, in fact, adolescent offenders, and cyber offenders. So we look at these folks, right, are these kind of groupings of offenders, and then we look at the treatment types, cognitive behavioral. Group therapy and modeling is another area. Empathy training, and we talked about how controversial that is. Sexuality training, right? Family therapy, and other measures such as residency restrictions, pharmacotherapy, and we talked a little bit about that previous in the class. Castration, chemical castration, if you will, physical castration, the role of involuntary civil commitments in this process. Main conclusions, well, he develops a table, and this was kind of formed the core of his paper. You can see treatment by subtype table, inclusion of sexuality training in the treatment of sex offenders, suggestion of grouping subtypes into clusters to provide more effective treatment strategies. So let's go down the list here, and we see that there's one-on-one talk therapy, and we're familiar with that, cognitive behavioral therapy, group therapy and modeling, empathy training, family therapy, and sexuality training, right? Well, I was fascinated as I started reading along with Josh and listening to his explanations. Compensatory sexual rapists, these are people who rape out of the need to demonstrate to themselves their sexual prowess, etc. Right? So what might be an effective, and it just goes down the list then. One-on-one talk therapy is suggested as might be, in fact, useful. Cognitive behavioral therapy, maybe not, right? Sexuality training, perhaps, right? Sadistic sexual rapists. So sadists are people who actually enjoy harming others and experience pain. Notice that's different than compensating for what one believes to be one's lack of sexual prowess. Power control non-sexual rapists, that is, sex is not part of the deal for them. They rape to exert power. Or opportunistic non-sexual rapists, and these are people who then stumble upon an opportunity and can't resist it. Josh's main premise is that each of these represents a different desire and a different set of behaviors, right? They came to these differently, and treatment needs to be tailored to that as well. Fixated child molesters. These are people who think about children and children exclusively, right? Regressed child molesters. Now that one, regressed child molesters, is kind of strange, but when you think about it, let's suppose that someone is differently abled. Let's suppose that someone suffers mental retardation, that their development, let's say, ceases at age 10 or 11. So we're looking at someone who might be 17, 18 years old, but their cognitive and their socio-emotional development is fixed at 9 or 10 years old. What happens when this person develops sexual urges? And that is, the urges can be quite powerful, and especially if they're kind of socio-emotionally kind of stunted in this regard. Who do you think, once they develop sexual urges, would be an attractive partner? And when you think about it, here's an 18, 19-year-old who wants to have sex, is driven to have sex, but they view themselves as a 9 or 10-year-old. Doesn't it seem logical that they're going to seek out a 9 or 10-year-old partner? Now, obviously, this is prohibited and can happen, but we can see that that situation is far different than someone like Ted Bundy, who likes to make people suffer in the act. In fact, a regressed child molester is not someone who necessarily wants to inflict any level of suffering, but wants to have a relationship, albeit an inappropriate one. So you can see that tailoring these treatments to the nature of the offense and the acquisition of the offense type can be critical, right? And you might have strange cases, male accompanied, male coerced, and this is often where we have a male who's in partnership with a female in committing these acts. Teacher, student, lover kind of thing we've talked about, right? Naive experimenter, it applies just that. Sexual aggressive, sexual compulsives, group influenced, and so you go on down the list. Cyber offenders, collectors, that was pretty interesting. These are people who may just simply collect child pornography and then it escalates at some point in time. And then we go on the traveler. These traveler cyber offenders, interesting. These are people who desire to travel to commit their acts. It's in part manufacturer cyber offenders are people who create the pornography that may be illegal. And then chatter cyber offenders. So you can see that there isn't a one-size-fits-all explanation for these behaviors. These behaviors differ in their purpose and their manifestation, and so should the treatment, according to Josh Vitti. So it was a remarkable program. I mean, a remarkable thesis by Josh. A lot of hard work and a lot of deep thinking went into it. And that's why I like to share it, because you guys represent our future, right, in what you think and how you approach it. So you learn methods here at school and you learn a background and a context, but what are you going to do with it? How are you going to push it forward to help your community? And that's always critical in my thinking, that you go out and do that. So let's return to evil. Enough of that for now. And what we can say then, evil should be recognized among themselves, right? A few forensic scientists have taken to thinking of these people as not merely disturbed, psychologically disturbed, but actually evil. Evil in that their deliberate habitual savagery defies any psychological explanation and defies any type of treatment. And this is a horrendous idea to consider, that at some point we start abandoning science and embracing the label evil. But in some cases, and in some people's life work, the alternatives just don't seem to exist, that we come back to this explanation of evil. I want to talk here for a minute about Dr. Stone. This is just the intro to a show about Dr. Stone's scale of evil. Let's just get jazzed by the intro, and then I'll talk about the actual 22 levels of evil according to Dr. Stone. Dr. Stone's interesting in that he has attempted to quantify this, and describe the typologies.
Scale exists to measure the darkest corners of human behavior. From impulse killings to madness-fueled violence. Calculated acts of cruelty, torture, and brutality. Forensics now reveals those among us who are most evil.
So in fact, who is most evil? And this is a Discovery Times feature on Dr. Stone. I've just gone ahead and I'm going to talk about Dr. Stone's scale of evil. Do we live in evil times? Is Richard Ramirez, the Night Stalker, correct? Do we live in evil times? Is Robert Reaver, the profiler, saying that we are increasingly watching times facilitate the expression of evil and the opportunities to punish it as being diminished? Right? Let's look at Dr. Stone then, and his acknowledging evil as a trend. Now, at the very bottom, right, this is like no evil or ultimately low evil, and rated as 01, that is, bottom line, those who kill in self-defense and do not show psychopathic tendencies. So, home invasion robbery. Someone comes into one's home, one retaliates, right, and defends one's family by shooting that person. Then Stone would put them into category 01, and that's how this is used. You have an example, and then rank ordering on the basis of the behavior. Notice it is a behaviorally motivated scale. Here, what if we observe jealous lovers who through egocentric or immature are not psychopathic and commit a crime out of jealousy, probably a crime of passion. Right? Now 3, willing companions of killers, aberrant personality, probably impulse-ridden with antisocial traits so that they go along. Right? 4, killed in self-defense but have been extremely provocative towards the victim. So that is, we push the victim, and this might be kind of, you know, the quintessential Old West. You keep pushing on this guy, you keep pushing on this guy until he calls you out, and then you shoot him down on the street, right? But it really was your calling them out that caused the need to, in fact, shoot them. Right? 5, traumatized, desperate people who kill abusive relatives and others like to support a drug habit but lack significant traits. And these people are genuinely remorseful. It was an impulse issue, they lost control, what have you. Impetuous, hot-headed murderers, yet without marked psychopathic features. So these are people who just maybe would benefit from, let's say, some kind of intervention like anger management training and lessons in impulse control. 7, highly narcissistic, not distinctly psychopathic people with a psychotic core who kill people close to them. Jealousy is an often underlying motive. And so we go on down, we should probably say go on up the list. And you can see, I don't want to read each one of these. Let's go to 13, lucky 13, right? Killers with inadequate, rageful personalities who snapped. Now, interestingly, Kuklinski describes some of the murders he committed that would fit as a number 13. He talks about being passed by some people in a van. He was driving along, kind of out in the hills, and these people in a van passed him, and he didn't like their looks. And later, as he's driving along, he sees them pulled off at a turnout. And having determined that he didn't like their looks, he pulls in behind them in this turnout and then shoots all 3 of them because they made him mad. Right? So something caused him perhaps to snap. Relatively low justification. But it also then, is it possible that we will see evil people, if you agree Kuklinski was evil, for example, maybe operate or demonstrate behaviors at different levels of Stone's scale. And I don't know how much traction Stone's scale is going to gain over the long run. I don't know what it absolutely does for us, other than kind of Stone's career has led him to solidify his thinking by developing this scale. Let's go on. Let's go 18. Torture murderers with murder as the primary motive. So now we're getting serious, and you might be thinking ahead towards the depravity research by Dr. Wellner. We're headed there as well, right? 19. Psychopaths driven to terrorism, subjugation, intimidation, and rape, short of murder. So these would be torturers, right? 20. Torture murderers with torture as the primary motive, but in psychotic personalities. So they're getting half a break because it's maybe the result of psychosis, and so there may be an element of insanity. Let's look at the last two then. 21. Psychopaths preoccupied with torture in the extreme, but not known to have committed murder. And then finally, the psychopathic torture murderer is at the top of the scale, with torture as their primary motive. And notice that often torture is considered far more evil than is killing, right? Killing is often almost considered humane when a victim has been tortured to the extent that killing puts them out of their suffering. So there it is, Stone's scale of evil, for better or for worse, but I present it as an attempt, Stone's attempt to try and quantify evil on the basis of behavioral observable criteria, right? Now, whether it's a reliable scale, whether multiple practitioners would use it in the same way and come to the same conclusions, I assume remains untested at this point. This is really kind of Stone's deal. So let's talk about depravity scale research, Dr. Michael Wellner, and those of you who have chosen to do the extra credit, right, then participated in this study. And let's look at what it's about. Words like evil, heinous, depraved have long been used in criminal sentencing codes to distinguish crimes that warrant more severe sentencing. Yeah, even in a justice system that seeks to uphold fairness, right, and objectivity, there's no standardized definition, standardized, consistent, clear definition of these presently used legal terms. So what does it mean when a crime or a criminal is depraved? And how should the jury process that information, and how should it inform the sentencing? Notice, this shouldn't be presented prior to the judgment of guilt or innocence, right? We need to separate that. But in terms of bifurcated, that is, someone's been found guilty, now we can talk about the depravity of the act and have that guide the sentencing. Well, what Stone what Wellner's attempting to do is to standardize a definition. Now, Phase B, and this is, research has changed over the years, so Phase B, Phase C was one way it was conducted. I think it's informative to look back at this, though. Phase B enables the general public to shape the specific intents, actions, and attitudes that should be included as items for the depravity standard instrument. So it comes off a lot like Stone's scale of evil. How do we define what is depraved? What do we need to see in terms of evidence, behavioral evidence, to then classify people at different levels of depravity, right? And then C involves the general public in refining the relative weight of these items. So when we compare, let's say, different forms of torture or different reasons for it, how does the public perceive this? Because Wellner ultimately wants the public to be involved in the decision-making process. That this is a community and a society effort to punish those who do wrong against society, right? So how is it assessed? So, the first project ever developed that invites citizens' direct input to forensic science research. The first project ever developed in which citizens shape future criminal sentencing standards. And it's done through survey research. It's done empirically rather than through relationships to legislators and moving the ball forward in that way. So, what I'm going to do is I'm going to present this next video as a separate part, right? So I'm going to leave here for a minute, and then the next part of this video lecture will be devoted to the top 50 serial killer moments. I know it's pretty heinous, and it's not necessary to watch this next section for this course. There'll be no questions derived from it, but I do think it kind of gives us a flavor for what's going on here. So that's the warning. The video that's going to be in the next installment, right, is graphic in content, it's graphic in language, it's graphic in imagery, But if you're compelled to investigate evil further via this format, then you can go ahead and watch this.